Years of Legend of the Five Rings is a series of interviews celebrating 3 decades since the debut of L5R at Gen Con 1995. In this second series of the Play to Win podcast from Aconyte Books, we'll explore the perspectives of the people who had a hand in the franchise's making, past and present, the lasting impact L5R has had on their lives, and what about L5R has made it an enduring force in the tabletop games industry after all these years. I'm your host, Katrina Ostrander, and I'm the creative director of story and setting with the franchise development team at Asmodee. I've had the privilege of working on L5R in various roles since 2015, including as writer, fiction editor, RPG developer, and story lead. In my current role, I help oversee the brand's development as it expands further into novels, comic books, video games, board games, and more. But before that, I was simply a big fan of the setting. In this episode, we dive deeper into the early days of Legend of the Five Rings. I talked to DJ Trindle, who wore many hats at AEG, not least of all, line editor for the L5R role-playing game. He shares his insights into how a card game gets made, how the first edition of the RPG came together, apparently actual katanas were involved, and the cardinal rule of rules editing. I also learn about the origins of the Sparrow Miner clan and how a Rokugan dice game referenced in flavor text became a real game you could actually play. Check out our show notes or legendofthefiverings.com to download a copy of those rules for your own enjoyment. Now, let's go on to the show. All right, so today I am joined by DJ Trindle, one of the original folks working on Legend of the Five Rings with Alderac Entertainment Group. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Happy to be here.
Great. So I said you were one of the original creators. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got involved, what your role was on the original card game.
Sure. So it goes back to 1992. My best friend, Dave Williams, and I graduated from Harvey Mudd College. He was an engineering major. I was a physics major. And after that, I stayed in Southern California, and he moved home to Syracuse, and then came back in the fall of 1993, and he brought with him half a box of Magic the Gathering beta boosters. And got our friend group hooked on the game, and we started hanging out with the LA Magic crowd. And there was a local game convention 3 times a year at an LAX hotel, Strategicon. And that's where we ran into John Zinser and Jolly Blackburn, because at the time they were publishing an independent game magazine, Shadus, and their company was Alderac Entertainment Group. And so at the time, that was the only thing that they had. They had a magazine, but it was independent. All of the other major magazines were captive or in-house for somebody. So we met these guys. We got to know them the same way we got to know everybody else who was in the gaming circles in LA at the time. And then at one point, AEG put out a call for interns. And so Dave decided it would be fun to work for a game company, and he applied. And I do remember the day that he went over there, he came to me right before he left and asked whether he should wear the tie. And I told him, yes, wear the tie, because this is a job interview and it shows that you're taking it seriously. And he did. And so he went in, half a dozen other guys went in, and that evening, John and Jolly and the third partner, Dave C., were all going over all of the people who had applied. And at one point, one of them remembered the guy with the tie. And so they decided to hire Dave, which worked out well for them.
It seems so, in hindsight.
Yes. And so a little while later, Dave had been working at AEG. He was writing articles for them, especially on Magic. And one night, he was going over to the AEG world headquarters, which was John and Jolly's apartment, and asked if I wanted to come along. And I said, yeah, sure. Sounds interesting. I'll go and see how the sausage is being made. And so we showed up. He turned in his column. And since I was the guy who always proofread everybody's papers for them in college before they turned them in, I proofread his column before he turned it in to Jolly for that issue of Shadus. And the next day, Jolly got in touch with me and said, our usual guy who does the proofreading isn't available and we're going to press tomorrow. Can you do me a favor? And turns out that yes, I could. And so I went down and I got to read next month's Shadus, which I was already buying at the game store all the time. So this was great because I got to see it early and I got to see it for free. And I enjoyed it. It was interesting seeing how he put everything together, seeing how layout worked. I had not done anything with layout before. This was in the days of Quark Express. And I got fairly good at Quark Express eventually, which, as far as I can tell, is a completely useless skill set. I don't think it is around anymore.
There are some applications, mostly including resurrecting dead RPG files.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I am the equivalent of the guys who were hired to avert Y2K because they were the only ones who remembered how to program in COBOL.
Yeah.
That's where I am with layout. So anyway, I had a good time. The next week, I contacted Jolly and said, hey, can I work on the next one? And so in a little bit, I was actually on the masthead as an assistant editor. So all of that is what gets us to where the game gets started, because the only product was the magazine, but this is, at this point, early in 1994, and everybody had seen how Magic was doing. Everybody said, this is a great concept. We would like to do this. And so specifically John Zinser, Z, really wanted to do a CCG. And he and Dave C. had a role-playing game group that had done Bushido back in the day. And so they wanted to do a samurai game. And the other thing was, yes, fine, samurai game, it's fine. That's not actually going to be any different from any of the other games that are, Magic is about Dominia. And there was the TSR game, Spellfire, was, if I recall correctly, the first CCG to actually come out after Magic had shown that this was a thing. But what we decided was the important thing is that it's going to have a story, and the world is going to develop a story, and it is going to have the players contribute to how it is that the story develops. And that was baked in from the very beginning. It was a very early idea.
One of the ways that it stood out, I think, from the rest of the landscape at the time.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So we wanted to do a CCG. So at this point, you start to assemble Ocean's 11. So the good news was that they already had Dave. And it turns out that Dave was not only a good Magic player and also good at writing columns about Magic. It turns out he's also a talented game designer. He's one of the top players in Southern California. He's got an engineering background, and he's already on the team. So from the beginning, he was going to be the lead designer. They brought on John Wick, and we knew John because he had written submitted an article to Shadus about diceless role-playing games and the advantages of them. And if I recall correctly, it was called Shakespeare Didn't Use Dice. And it was well written, it was interesting, it got our attention. And so he was brought in as the guy in charge of the story, because if you're going to have a story-based game, you're going to need a story guy. They also brought on Matt Wilson, who is, if I recall correctly, still in the industry, and he runs his own company now. They do miniatures games. So they brought on Matt Wilson, and we knew him as an artist who had the booth next to the Shadus booth at one of those LAX conventions, and it had been slow. We had gotten to talk to him. We had gotten to see his portfolio. It was fantastic. And so he came on, and he was in charge of the art. And then I was there, and I kept the magazine running because that was what was generating any revenue at all at that point.
Subscriptions are useful for keeping a business afloat, yes?
Yes, absolutely. And, of course, there are astonishingly huge initial outlays in making a card game. I mean, for one thing, you have to pay for 300 pieces of art, which is non-trivial. We did not have the latest and greatest computers, but we did have Macintoshes that were up to the task of doing layout for a card game and being able to produce high enough quality files that they could then go to the printer and still look good. And, we had to be able to scan in all of those 300 pieces of art. And so there were scanners, and we had tape backup in case terrible things were to happen, which the tape backup saved us more than once because
wow,
computers are finicky. This was also in the SCSI era of external storage. And if you have not had to experience that and you have only lived in the placid waters of the USB world, I would say just be grateful for that, because SCSI was legendarily finicky and tricky to get right. Nobody mourned it when they finally got rid of it and went to, initially Thunderbolt and then actual USB. So that was sort of the core of the team.
Mm-hmm.
There were other people, but those were the major roles that needed to be filled. And then, of course, Z was running the business side of things, and also he happened to know people. He's who brought in Ryan Dancy. Ryan was up in Seattle. He had a mail order company, ISO Media, and Ryan also had useful connections, especially up in the Seattle area. And so that's how they ended up finding all of the correct people to finance things. So we decided, all right, we are going to do a card game, and it's going to be about samurai. And at this point, I mostly told them, all right, good luck and Godspeed, while I kept the lights on. It was a terrific amount of work. I think it's the only sort of thing that you can do when you are in your 20s. 7 days a week, long late nights. Jolly had a couch in his office that at one point we had a sign-up sheet for, so that you could sign up for a block of time to take a nap on the couch. And that was the sort of schedule that we were working on. People took naps under their desks. Matt Wilson, I believe, uniquely among us, had a girlfriend, and that meant that sometimes she would drop by the office and bring him clean underwear. So that is the cauldron in which L5R was made. It was just everybody there all of the time, constantly working on all of the things, while also we were getting a monthly publication out.
So when did you get pulled from Shadis over to the wild world of L5R?
Well, once they were done and they had a complete playable prototype, that was when they brought me on, because you can't edit your own work.
Words to live by.
Yes. It is important when I went in that I not know how it was supposed to work, because that way, if I read something in the rule book and it didn't make sense, I would need to ask. If I read something in the rule book and I already know what it's supposed to do, then the words on the page probably suggest that. But if they suggest it and don't compel it, that's a problem as soon as the game gets out into the wilds where you do not have somebody helpfully explaining it to you. So that was the point where I came on, and I looked at the things. I got rid of some of the contradictions. I got the rules whipped into approximate shape. It was certainly much better when it went out than it was as that initial prototype that I worked with. But nevertheless, I did run the frequently asked questions list for a while immediately after it came out, because I figured that was more or less on me. And so we wanted to launch for Gen Con, because you want to be at Gen Con. It's the biggest convention.
Yeah.
Everybody's there. That's when you want to launch. The timing didn't work out. We weren't able to launch Imperial Edition for Gen Con. But what we did was we printed a demo sheet of 100 cards, and Matt Wilson got into his elderly pickup truck and drove from Southern California to Texas, where our printer was. And he loaded the back of the pickup truck all full of all of the boxes of printed and cut and cigarette-wrapped cards, and then immediately got on the road and drove up to Gen Con in Milwaukee. And this was, I believe that he had Matt Starosik along with him, who was a friend of his who had been working with them on the design as well. And so the two of them probably did this entire trip in 24, 36 hours. I mean, it's just, they drove through, they got everything loaded, and then they drove straight through again. And they came and they dropped off the cards and said, here are the cards. We're going to go lie down. And all of us who were there working at the booth started, immediately ripped into all of the decks, started doing demos right there. We did demos the entire show, and whenever somebody played demo, they got to keep the deck. And so that's how we got the first cards into the hands of the people who are so interested in games that they are willing to come to Milwaukee in the summer to try out the new stuff. And I do think that if Matt does not do the cannonball run to get those cards into the hands of people at Gen Con in 1995, I think that when Imperial Edition hits in October, I think it just vanishes, just like so many of the other card games did at that time. Even after it did release, that first year, we were out doing demos at any game store that would have us. And all of us, every weekend, all over Southern California, and I think I went to Vegas twice because there were a couple of stores there. I ended up in St. Louis once, and I think that was also very important in getting the game to launch, was having this entire, everybody who worked there all the time going out in our official AEG garb and boxes of cards and saying, here, let us come to your store and we will teach people to play for free. And this also turned out that we had people who learned and wanted to do demos too. And so, again, this was largely John Zinser realized, hey, you know what? That is a vital resource, is you have people who are so enthusiastic that they want to show other people how to play the game. And that's where the Bounty Hunters program started. So eventually there were shirts. We would have, years later, the Bounty Hunters were largely the ones running all of the demos in the booth, because these were the fans. These are the serious fans. And again, I think they are a big reason that L5R caught on, is because they got excited about it. And then they communicated that excitement to other people. And one of the important things in a CCG is, do you have other people to play with?
Yeah.
And these people kind of ensured that, yeah, I will play with you. Let me show you how it works. And because of that, there was always a very strong community around L5R from the beginning. And I think it's because of all of the demos and the connections that everybody made.
It's truly grassroots.
It very much was. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, do you have any distinct memories of your time working those demos, or is there any particularly memorable store or fan interaction that you had?
I do remember that there was one, let's see, this would have been after Shadowlands came out. So that was our first expansion. And I was at a local game store, and the Shadowlands expansion had the Naga in it, and they can't win by honor because they're not a clan, they're not human, they can't take the throne. But there was a card in there where if they were honorable enough, they did have a Naga character who could win you the game anyway. There were already a few ways to win. You can win by honor, or you can win by combat, or you can win by enlightenment. This was winning by being a particularly honorable Naga, but it was a new win condition. And at this event, after Shadowlands, one of the players managed to pull it off, which was not easy because the Naga are not focused on honor because, again, not human. It's not really their thing. But he said, you know what? I want to see if I can make this work. And he did. And the place went nuts because somebody had managed to do this thing that had never been done before.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. It's just that level of excitement for, hey, here's this guy who I don't know, but he's also an L5R player. And we are both excited about the same thing because look at what he can do.
Oh, that's awesome. Circling back a little bit, you had talked about the FAQ that you were responsible for maintaining. And that came out in the Imperial Herald.
Right.
Could you talk to us a little bit about what that was and how that came to be, how you were involved?
Right. So the Imperial Herald was a 16-page magazine-style newsletter, essentially for the fan club. And it had articles like that, and it had write-ups of here is an important storyline event, and here's what happened at it, and here's the frequently asked questions because I didn't do a complete job of explaining how it worked in the rule book, that sort of thing. But something else that it had was the idea of making the packaging worth something. So John wanted to use everything, including the packaging. And before this, the shrink wrap for a booster pack was just garbage, and you would often see, people would just throw them away. Instead, our shrink wrap had one koku printed on it. And so the idea is you cut out the koku, you put them in an envelope, you mail them to us, and we will redeem them. And here in the Imperial Herald is all the list of all of the things that you can redeem them for. And it was promo cards and then other branded things. And that's the same sort of thinking that put the strongholds on the box. That was why the original strongholds were on the box, because the box is not trash. The box is your clan's home. Here's your stronghold, and you're going to start with it in play. And so that was a similar sort of use for what can we use? We have to have this packaging, but how can we use it?
The other thing that I was curious about, because I've recently had to dig through some old Imperial Heralds in search of original story prize choices, and how did they decide who was going to be a Kolot master, and how did they decide which champion would fall, and so on. I noticed that you were credited as the Kolot caterer. Do you remember what story lies behind that title?
I do not, I am afraid. I think that was just a one-off joke that was just tossed in there. But the Kolot were something that came out of John and Dave's old Bushido game. The idea that there is this secret network of secret people doing secret things secretly. So whenever anything was possibly off the books or shady, the Kolot would be the tag. So I think that the Kolot caterer probably indicated that, yes, I am getting this done, but it is not the first thing that I am working on today.
That makes total sense. The other place that I see your name a lot when I go through the L5R books on my shelves are the first edition of the role-playing game.
Oh, yes.
And I'm curious if you have tales of those travails as well.
Well, some of them, yeah. And the thing that really helped kickstart the role-playing game was that we had 2 years of story in the card game. And that means that we had a lot of world already built. And the people who were working on the book were also the people who had been working on the story over those previous 2 years. So it was already things that they knew, or for that matter, had come up with initially on their own. Yeah, I was line editor, but that means that I had to assign and get the words out of the writers, and then make sure that all of those words conform to the house style, and make sure that what person A is writing is consistent with what person B is writing, and then make sure that once all of that is in, I have cleaned up all of the typos and grammatical fails. And then after all of that, get everything delivered to the layout team so that they could flow it into the Quark Express layout files. And that's a lot of jobs, and there was only one me, which is why it was perhaps not as clean a product as we would have liked it, but it was fine. People loved it anyway.
Yeah, they're beloved still.
We won the 1998 Origins Award for Best RPG for first edition, which was really very validating for me, because this was something where I had more or less been in charge of the whole thing all the way through. So even though I hadn't written it, and I hadn't done any of the art, and I hadn't done any of the layout, I felt a lot of ownership of this huge project that we managed to get done.
Absolutely.
And again, it was a team thing. Dave Williams, again, was in charge of design. He's the one who came up with the roll and keep system, which it turns out was surprisingly useful for the milieu. It turned out that it represented very well how specifically combat worked. One of the things that we were doing by this point was we were taking lessons with Sensei Tony Cull, who was teaching us Kenjutsu, which is the combat form of the martial art with the katana.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very much a Musashi disciple. Your first thought must always be on the cut. You're always thinking about how to cut the other person. And we developed a healthy respect for the katana and what it could do, because the thing is a 4-foot long razor blade. And I mean, that directly influenced how the combat mechanics in the role-playing game worked, because if you get hit with a katana, you have been hit, and it is going to seriously slow you down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was part of why it is that we did not have a sort of a swashbuckling approach to combat. No, combat was very serious, and one of you was probably going to be dead. We did manage to pick up the swashbuckling motif later when we did 7th Sea, but that was appropriate for 7th Sea. For what we were doing here, combat, deadly serious. And if you are in it, you had better be in it without any reservations, and you had better be trained, because these are very, very dangerous things to use.
Yeah, I had no idea that there was some like real life study of what was going into the game. That's fantastic.
Yes, not only real life study. I mean, we would show up every week and we had our wooden katanas, and we would go through the forms, and we would, partner up with each other and go through, okay, Ichi, Ni, San, are you, you do the step and then you pull back the blade here, and then it goes up over your. So, yeah, we were all doing the actual forms that he managed to beat into us. Because, again, not all of us were terribly athletic, but I think that we all wanted to have what is the kinesthetic feel of moving in this style.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not stay with it long enough to start sparring with the live blades. And I think that that's probably good for me, because it means that I did not end up marked by a live blade.
You are here to tell the tale 30 years later.
That I am, yes.
You talked about how proud you were of winning that Origins Award for Best Role-Playing Game for the core rulebook of first edition. Are there any other products that really stand out in your mind as works that you were particularly proud of, or maybe that were a particular challenge for you?
Given that I did work on essentially everything that we produced that had words on it, I don't know that there was necessarily a favorite, but something that I do have a soft spot for is the dice game Fortunes and Winds. And it had shown up as just a name in the story, and it was sort of a plot point a couple of times, or they needed a gambling game, and so this was the gambling game. It was Fortunes and Winds, and what we do about it was it's a dice game, and Fortunes and Winds is the best result. And there wasn't anything else, but for one of the Scorpion books, we wanted to put the rules in the book, which means that we needed to invent the rules. And so I invented the rules for it. And it took me a while to figure out, first of all, okay, so Fortunes and Winds has to be a thing. So how do I come up with the dice? What sort of dice will that look like? And how can you score with these dice? What sort of scoring combinations can you put together? And what are the payouts for those scoring combinations? And so on. So I dove in and did things with spreadsheets and came up with what actually is a reasonably well-balanced dice game. It would be a banked game, and the house edge would be about 1.5%, which is not so bad. But it is one of the only games, qua game, that I designed and got into print. And so I'm fond of it.
Yeah.
And then also for the CCG, I never did a whole lot of actual card design, but I did come up with a few things. One of them was the Sparrow Clan, which was a very minor clan. And so I designed several cards for it. One of them made it into, I think, the third expansion, which was the Sparrow Clan Storyteller, who was this old guy. And he was able to latch onto an opponent's honorable personality and take him out of play pretty much indefinitely. And if they wanted to get there, they were not able to get out of his clutches without becoming dishonored, because he would just, the whole concept was, here is this old guy, but he's honorable and you cannot honorably blow him off. And so he is going to pin you down. He's going to talk your ear off about the olden days and how things used to be. And you are honor bound to have to listen to him. And so that made it into the card game. I think he's in Anvil of Despair. And then eventually, when we did the Minor Clans book for the role-playing game, Rich Wolf did a whole chapter on them and did a fantastic job. So I would say that those are my two major contributions to actual gameplay as far as those were concerned.
I know that the Sparrow are small, but their fans are very passionate. So I think
Yes.
a lot of people really appreciate you're inventing them. Do you have any particular inspirations, because they're fallen crane samurai who are impoverished, practically peasants eking out a living on this terrible farmland next to this wonderful farmland? And
yeah, what I really wanted was something that played against the great clans. Was okay, everybody is a great clan. How about, let's come up with somebody who's really not. And what does that look like? And how do they fit into this world? And I think that the backstory that eventually turned up was the best possible way to explain how it is that you end up with this tiny little poor clan.
Yeah. And I love it when there's a clever narrative way of doing something that's fairly typical, I think, in mechanics, like shutting down a personality, or not necessarily removing them from play, but kind of tanking them or keeping them from doing something.
Yes.
But then using storytelling instead of ninja poison or something more imminently obvious.
Yes, and it also played into the honor. For instance, if you think about which clan is most likely to be susceptible to having important high honor personalities that they really don't want to be taken out of play, that would be the crane right there. So it would make sense that the Sparrow storyteller would latch onto them and talk their ear off, while they would rather be doing literally anything else, but they can't, because that would be dishonorable.
They're too polite. Yes, I love it. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here, and I'm going to ask you one question that I have for all my guests who were involved with L5R during that era, which is, where were you on the Day of Thunder?
On the Day of Thunder, I was working the booth. I was probably wearing this shirt, in fact.
Can you describe the shirt for folks who are listening?
This is my original embroidered Legend of the Five Rings shirt that AEG provided all of us, because we would wear our embroidered shirts as we would work on the floor at Gen Con and at Origins. And so we would pack all of our shirts. There was generally one per product line. And so I was in my Legend of the Five Rings shirt on the Day of Thunder. I was working the booth, and in the morning, people were coming by and they were purchasing cards from us. And then by the late morning, nobody was purchasing anything from us, because they were all over in our demo space across the aisle. And so I was able to watch with everybody else, and the lion player and the crane player got together and decided they were not going to fight. John had written all of the possible endings for all of the clans and sealed them in envelopes and not shown them to anybody. We didn't know what anything was. And then as each clan was eliminated, he would tear up the envelope. And so the last two players were the lion and the crane, and they decided that they wanted to work together to defeat Fuling and not compete with each other. And so John tore up his last two envelopes, and went completely extemporaneous in his description of how that was going to play out. And the good news for everybody is that John had a background in being able to do this because he had been a regular at Renaissance fairs and sort of this whole bardic live storytelling thing. It was not anything new to him. So John knew how to tell a story to an audience. And of course, everybody there was absolutely rapt finding out what is it that was going to happen here at the end of this 2-year-long story that we've all been trying to bring to a triumphant conclusion. And so he was up on his chair and he tore up his envelopes and he extemporized what it is that happens when the crane and the lion combine forces against the big bad Fulang. And it was fantastic. I wish somebody had recorded it, but I'm kind of glad that even if they didn't, at least several hundred of us were there to hear it.
Yeah.
And it's always been about, I think, connection, because it's always been about the story. Each game is its own self-contained story. It is the story of your deck versus my deck, but these are these two clans, and this is how it is that they are in strife with one another. Mm-hmm. And then all of that combines to be put together into the overarching story. And people getting together and telling stories to each other and with each other is ancient and powerful and compelling activity. And any group of people who tell stories set in the same world are a community. And I think that that is what you saw on the Day of Thunder, but also what you see when you are at any sort of L5R, a tournament or role-playing game or live-action role-playing game, because I think that it is a way that people connect with each other.
Yeah, that's so beautiful to hear it kind of put that way. I think that really captures a lot about what makes gaming so special, what made L5R so special. Mm-hmm. It's probably a large part to do with why, we're here celebrating 30 years of L5R. Now, on a more personal topic, I wanted to ask, how would you say that L5R has affected your life? Are there any lessons that you've taken away from working on the brand or doors that it opened up for you? I guess this is a chance for a little bit of self-reflection.
Well, I can actually say with certainty that my life is completely different if L5R is not in it. Because I told you the story earlier about the very first time Dave went to go and talk to John and Jolly. I told him, wear the tie, and that got him the job. And then by extension, that got me the job. But because L5R was then a success, the company expanded, and some of those people are still my friends to this day. But more importantly, I wouldn't have been in the game industry for the 12 years I was there. And because Dave was also in the industry, he met his girlfriend, Cindy, and his girlfriend, Cindy, had a good friend, Lessa, and she introduced me to Lessa, and we have now been married for 20 years, and our older kid just graduated from high school.
Congratulations.
And
very cool.
That doesn't happen unless I tell Dave wear the tie, and unless we do the work to make sure that L5R is a success and we get to meet all of the people that we got to meet because we were doing this.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
So yes, I can categorically say my life would not be what it is without L5R.
Are there any other cool pieces of L5R history or lore that you think is fun to kind of dig back up for the 30th anniversary kind of retrospective that we're doing here?
Okay, so yes, this is a promo card designer wins that we did early on, and the mechanic is if your face is on this card, you win the game.
Oh.
And yeah, and it's an event. So, I mean, this is something that automatically goes off when it pops up in your province. And so that's Matt Starosik, who I mentioned is the co-pilot on the Cannonball Run. He's the one on the left, and then there's me and Dave Williams and Rob Vaux, and then in the front it's let's see, I made a list here. Yeah, so Ryan Dancy, John Wick, Steve Huff, who was our layout guy, Dave C, and John Zinser.
Amazing.
And so we all got copies of our very own card that we could use to just auto-win the game. Because what's the point of designing a card game if you can't give yourself an auto-win condition?
That's brilliant. I'm amazed that you don't have that sleeved.
I have a different one sleeved, and I've worn it taped to my Gen Con badge before. We each got, I don't know, 4 or 5 maybe.
Okay, so you have backups.
Yeah, yes, I can show it in all of its glory.
Well, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I learned so much about L5R, like so many different tales and getting to see behind the curtain. This has been really special. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm happy to have been here, and thanks for having me.
This audio recording is copyright Asmodee North America Incorporated, 2025, all rights reserved. Produced and published by Aconyte Books. Legend of the Five Rings and the Legend of the Five Rings logo are trademarks or registered trademarks of Asmodee North America. Stay up to date with all the news from Rokugan and sign up for the official newsletter at l5r.com. Subscribe to the Play to Win podcast from Aconyte Books for more episodes of 30 Years of Legend of the Five Rings.